Colleagues, thank you very much for joining us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, wherever you are. This is the latest session of the UNEG Evaluation Practice Exchange, which is being organized by the Peer Review Working Group. So for those of you that are not aware, familiar with these EPEs, this is an opportunity for UNEG members to present the latest work from the working groups and the interest groups to our broader membership and to our invited guests. The goal is to really exchange ideas and experience between evaluation practitioners in the international system and explore ideas and partnerships for work going forward. So I think today our goal is to introduce to you a tool developed by the working group to help assess the maturity of UN evaluation functions against the UNEG norms and standards. The primary use is in UNEG peer reviews, which many of you may be familiar with, which are peer-conducted assessments of UN evaluation functions against the UNEG norms and standards that involve both UNEG members, occasionally members from EvalNet evaluation offices and other partners. But the tool is also intended as a way to allow evaluation functions across the UN system to check their own performance against the norms and standards. So the run of play today will do a short introduction to the norms and standards, which is the broader framework that we've developed the tool around. Then the tool. Then we'll do a deeper dive into aspects of the tool, including some participation from all of you using Mentimeter, etc. Then we'll have a talk show format, a brief chance to check in and to talk to representatives from two evaluation entities in UNEG that have used the tool. And then we'll open it up to questions and answers. And as always, the exchange part of this is really important. So we will try to manage the time carefully. So for those colleagues on the call who are UNEG members, you'll be very familiar with this. For those that are not, just to do a very general introduction, the norms and standards are really provide the normative basis for evaluation in the UN system. They've been updated a number of times over the years. The latest update was in 2016. And you will see that they're divided into a set of 10 general norms that govern the way that we do evaluation across the UN system. And then there's an additional 4 norms that really talk more about the way that evaluation should be set up across the UN system. And we call these the institutional norms. And then they're backed up by a series of standards. So there's 5 general standards, but they go into quite some more detail. And together that really does provide us with the normative and sort of procedural framework for evaluation across the UN system. So we essentially use the norms and standards to come up with this maturity matrix, which really sort of declines or operationalizes the norms and standards in a series of criteria. We should certainly note that our work in the peer review working group has been based very much on previous work around supporting assessments of evaluation maturity and the maturity of evaluation functions across the UN system that were developed by the Joint Inspection Unit of the UN and also the Office of Internal Oversight, the OIOS. And the innovation with the framing in this tool is to really link some of the criteria of performance around the norms and standards specifically. And so really the goal there is to really organize these performance dimensions or these performance criterion around the norms and standards, which I think, well, we think as a group that improves the clarity of this tool, and it helps with peer reviews, but it also helps to socialize and publicize the norms and standards, which remain, of course, one of the flagship products of the UNEG group. And I think a very important element is that each of these criteria are defined according to 4 levels of maturity, and we're going to go into that in a bit more detail in the next section. And this also backs up the broader objective here, which is not only taking, for example, peer reviews, which is this exercise where we would use this as a tool for self-assessment. it doesn't just allow a snapshot and a one-shot assessment of progress against these levels of maturity, but it also defines quite clearly the journey towards increasing maturity. It presents different attributes of maturity, which can really help this be a learning tool and for evaluation functions to use outside the context of a peer review. So I think that's all really I had for introduction. I wanted just to make sure that we know that this is very much based around the norms and standards, and then this matrix overall, it does represent the latest the latest representation of work around trying to define and elaborate what evaluation maturity looks like. So I'll now hand over to Katinka for part 2.
Yes, thank you very much, Andrew, and also a warm welcome from my end to everyone. Thank you for joining. The idea for this kind of second part is that you get to know a little bit about the self-assessment maturity matrix. You should all have received the full document by email yesterday, and if not, please write in the chat and we will share it with you. But today, for the purpose of this section, we will just focus on a few of the norms and start norms, basically, and have you test them by using some polls. So just some instructions before we go to the polling. So please answer all questions to the best of your knowledge. Obviously, this is just for the purpose of testing it. So if they are not completely the reality, no worries about this. It should work both for UN agencies, but also for bilateral evaluation functions in general. Sometimes questions might not apply, or you might not know the answer, so please feel free to indicate, I do not know. Answers are, of course, anonymous, and as I mentioned, this is just for the purpose of testing the tool, so we will not take any conclusions from those answers you provide today. However, I still think it's a good exercise, at least it was for myself, to think about and reflect about the questions for our respective evaluation functions. And then, yeah, finally, of course, for time purposes, we will only be able to include 4 questions. There will be just 4 polls. And this is just a little extract from the entire matrix. But afterwards, we invite you to actually go through, if you have time and are interested in, go through the entire matrix to, and maybe do the self-assessment for your own evaluation function. Okay, if you're ready, we can move to the first norm, for which we will have a poll as well. So the first norm is about utility. It's the norm 2. So just to remind ourselves from the norms, what is utility about? So we should all have a clear intention to use actually the analysis conclusions and the recommendations and to inform decisions and actions, and making contributions to organizational learning, informed decision-making processes, and accountability for results. The majority actually of you, maybe it's only a slight majority, but is saying that there is a clear dissemination and communication strategy, and dissemination is well organized and systematic, and that there are standard approaches that are used but not differentiated by audience. The second highest number of you selected the category and indicator just below, saying that there is some dissemination, but it's not organized or systematic, and that there is no communication strategy as such. And you can see there is also some of you who have indicated that there's no dissemination at all, but others actually have indicated that there is a dissemination and communication strategy, and it's fully resourced, and communication destination approaches are differentiated by audience. And some of you have indicated, I don't know. So you can see there's a big difference between different offices, and I think that's also what we felt when filling in the matrix, but we'll hear more about that later. Let's move to the next poll, and first next norm. The next norm is about credibility. Just to remind ourselves very quickly what credibility was about. So highlighting just 3 core elements here. Credibility is grounded, and that's also closely linked to some other norms, for example, independence, impartiality, and of course a rigorous methodology. And the key elements of it are transparent evaluation processes, inclusive approaches involving relevant stakeholders, robust quality assurance systems. And it's important that findings and recommendations are derived from, of course, objective, reliable, and valid data sources and accurate quantitative and qualitative analysis. And the second poll question, we will launch it now. So you can see there again, similar like before, 5 different answer options, and one is I do not know. And you can now start reading the answer options. Again, the first one is the lowest one, and the last one is the highest level in terms of scoring. There's very much consensus on the second and third, say, levels. So most of you say that the report quality is consistent and that all recent reports attain a good level of quality. And a few recent reports are even of very high quality. And then the second largest group says that report quality is variable. So yeah, thanks again for taking this, poll. Now let's move to the next norm. It's about independence. Just to recall, the main difference of this norm is dividing between behavioral independence and organizational independence. And yeah, let us go to the next poll on independence. And the polling format, again, is the same format. You have, again, 5 answer options with the lowest, from the lowest to the highest level. So feel free to also respond here to the best of your knowledge. So again, there has been, most of you are saying that the head of evaluation has significant discretion over the evaluation and is function, and it is approved by the head of the organization. And there are safeguards for independence and no violations of independence. Some of you have even selected the actually 30%, even higher level with full discretion and approval by the governing board. So yeah, these seem to be very high levels. Thank you. Now we move to the last norm we've selected for this exercise and the last poll. So let's move to professionalism. That is norm 10. So professionalism, first we have looked at, yeah, what is it exactly? It's about professionalism itself and integrity. Who is concerned? Basically all participants to an evaluation, really ranging from evaluators, evaluation managers, evaluation heads, and the entire evaluation function. And how it is very much about access to knowledge, training, ethics, and so on. So we will launch this last poll now, and it follows again the same structure. So please fill it in once you're ready and you have read the different answer options. So yeah, most of you, actually large majority this time, say that it is moderate and that evaluators and evaluation managers usually abide by accepted norms, standards, and guidelines of professionalism, ethics, integrity, and cultural sensitivities, but that there are some infrequent exceptions. And then we have also some who actually report higher and some report lower scales here. So thank you so much for having taken this poll and having explored together with us a little bit the matrix, at least an extract of it. But I really invite you to look at the full one. But now I would like to hand over to Rachel, I guess, for the next part of the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Kanika. So as Andrew said, we have organized now a small talk show session with 2 special guests who will talk about their experience in using the maturity matrix as part of their the peer review process of their evaluation functions. So these are David Rader-Smith from UNHCR and Katinka Koker from UNITAR. Just for you to know that in 2021, 4 peer reviews were conducted: WFP, IOM, UNHCR, and UNITAR. 3 of them use the full peer review framework, so the anti-methodological framework of peer reviews, and 1 used a lighter version of the peer review with, in fact, a small panel of 2 UNEG peers supported by a consultant. This is the one that carried out the peer review of the evaluation function of UNITAR, which is a small evaluation function. UNHCR is considered as a medium-sized evaluation function, and the panel was quite large and quite unique, with 6 members, and it was quite diverse, with 2 UNEG members, but also 2 representatives from EVADNet, OECD DAC, 1 representative from ALNAP, and 1 representative from an international organization, ICRC. So all these 4 peer-reviewed agencies used some form of self-assessment matrix. But UNITAR and UNHCR tested the revised maturity matrix prepared by the peer review working group, and they will now tell us about their experience. And so I have 3 questions for them, and shall I start with Katinka? Yeah. Okay. So the first one is quite simple. It's quite descriptive about. You could tell us about the stage. At what stage of the peer review process did you prepare the self-assessment matrix, and how did you do so?
Yes, sure. Thank you, Rachel. So we have used the self-assessment matrix last year in April. That was precisely before we actually started even drafting the terms of references for the peer review of UNITAR, and was really a good exercise to inform also the TORs themselves, and helped informing the focus of it and the questions and the TORs. And at the same time, it was a very good moment because at UNITAR, we were just revising our own evaluation policy. And the self-assessment also helped us, informing changes to that policy, even before the peer review has added additional comments and suggestions on policy changes. So yeah, I think the momentum was very good. Yeah, it was done very early in the process. And with regard, yeah.
Yes, well, maybe you can get into the second question, which is about the usefulness. How useful did you find the matrix as a framework for your self-assessment? And perhaps you can tell us a little bit about your views on the pros and cons of this tool.
Sure, thank you, Rachel. Yeah, we're a very small evaluation team. So the way first we've used the matrix was really as an exercise, but we've basically filled it in individually and then compared whenever we actually didn't agree or had different indicators or selected for the different sub-questions, and then tried to discuss and compare, and also found consensus for the conflicting answers. All I'm going to say about pros and cons is also really from my perspective of a very small evaluation function, so it might not apply to others, of course. But in terms of what really we found positive about it was first this using the tool as a tool for self-reflection and really informing our thinking process. So it helped us identifying weaknesses and gaps, but also actually showed us where we have strength and where we are performing well, even before the peer review as such started. And actually, just after having done these filled in the self-assessment, we have, for example, revised at the next contract renewal our job descriptions, because we had noted that we have been scoring super low with regards to norm 10 on professionalism and the requirement to reduce bias that should be mentioned in job descriptions of evaluators, managers, and so on. So we have, despite a low scoring, we have afterwards taken action directly. And I think if we would fill in the self-assessment again now, we would score higher. It is also a great tool actually to combine self-assessment with a peer review. So basically having first self-assessment and then have it independently reviewed by the peer review. So I really think this is a great combination. And we found it very complete, really summarizing all norms and standards in one document, and very comprehensive. Nevertheless, there were some also cons that I would like to highlight. Of course, it's subjective nature. So some respondents may be more conservative than others. I know we are all evaluators and we try to be objective, but when it's your own work, it's sometimes, of course, difficult to take distance and be completely objective. Some questions also do not apply to all agencies. So we had, for example, I'm just giving you 2 examples, but there were 2 questions that did not apply fully to UNITA. One was under the norm on independence, where there was a mention of regular reports to member states on evaluation. Given our funding structure, this does not fully apply, so we did not know how to really respond. And another example is the norm on impartiality, where there was also a reference to the role of governing boards, and again, reference to member states, which did not fully apply. And finally, and that's my last point here, is that there were some of the performance or benchmarks that were formulated in a way that made it difficult for us to decide between 2 levels. Maybe you had the same feeling now in filling in the polls. But sometimes you feel like, oh, we're just in between, or the language does not fully apply. Just to give you one example, on norm 14, evaluation use and follow-up, there was a reference of recommendation implementation rates. And the indicators all refer to implementation after 3 years. So to what extent are recommendations being implemented after 3 years? Well, at UNITA, we don't track the implementation of recommendations after 3 years. And I think I recently saw UNEG heads also exchange about their different practices in following up on recommendations. And we all have different time intervals during which we track. So it's not necessarily 3 years, some to 6 months, 1 year, and so on. So there are really differences. So the indicator did not really work for us. And then obviously responding to it didn't feel right. So we have made a comment on this one as well.
Thank you, Ganika. And there is a last question about your recommendations for future peer reviews with respect to the content of the maturity matrix and its use.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, first of all, I would suggest to make it actually an online tool instead of a Word document, so that it can be filled in online, making it more intuitive. Because it's quite long as a document, so it took us really substantial amount of time to go through it at the end. So maybe just having it an online document with different sections makes it at least feel it passes quicker and more user-friendly. Also, for example, for calculating afterwards your score and seeing whether overall you are rather at lower or higher end, that could be an automatic calculation. And if it's not an online tool, it could be Excel-based. So Excel is just calculating automatically the scores with automated formulas. Then second recommendation would be to share good practices on how to best use it, a bit like we do today. So also looking forward to what David is sharing shortly with us. And for example, how to make it an exercise, how to make it brainstorming and self-reflection exercise together, whether it is a repetitive exercise we all should do every X years, whether we should share it actually afterwards with others for kind of internal review. So just seeing how others have filled it in. Or even just thinking of UN SWAP, the UN system-wide action plan for gender, where we have this reporting requirement. So why not making it actually something where we all report and we have afterwards a joint summary of how we assessed ourselves, and also defining action points on which we afterwards follow up and see how we can address those weaknesses that we have self-assessed. And then just some very small recommendations on making it, again, more user-friendly, including more hyperlinks, not just, the norms and standards are hyperlinked, but also other useful documents such as the ethical guidelines and the pledge, which I mentioned under norm 6. And Yeah, last but not least, including a column for justifications, because you can, of course, just fill in the matrix and give scores. But I think it's very important to each time include a justification why you have chosen a specific response, so that afterwards, not only yourself, you will remember what was your reasoning behind it, but also for others, for example, if you're peer reviewed, that they can compare afterwards and understand better why you've chosen a certain response. So for that, I think we need to include fields where people can provide a justification. But this is all. Overall, yeah, as I said earlier, it was a really useful product for us and process. So yeah, I stop here. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you very much, Katinka, for your very comprehensive response and for your very interesting recommendations. I think we'll discuss this later, but perhaps now I'd like to give floor to David. If you're okay, to start with the first question. At what stage did you use the maturity matrix, and how did you do so?
Thanks very much, Rachel, and hello everyone, and good to hear your experience, Katinka, which is, I think, quite similar to UNHCR's experience as well. We, I think, similarly to UNITAR, we did the self-assessment quite early on in the process of our peer review. Our peer review, as Rachel said, was commissioned by the High Commissioner for Refugees in 2021. And the reason, just a little bit of background there, was that our policy was coming to an end and we're in the process of revising and updating our evaluation policy and our new evaluation strategy right now. And so the peer review as a whole was seen to be a really critical input. In fact, it was written into the previous policy to have a peer review to inform us of how we're doing, how we're progressing as a function inside the UNHCR. And as part of that, this self-assessment obviously is a great opportunity to really get a sense of how the team, those evaluators working across the organization, feel, and whether there's common understanding of the norms and how we've applied them. So in terms of the process, as we said, we're a medium-sized group of about 15 professional evaluators, predominantly based in headquarters, but also in regions, a number of outposted senior evaluation officers. And so what we did is divide the team as a whole into pairs and provide a matrix and list all the evidence or the base evidence that we thought the judgment should be based upon, and ask those teams of two to take one norm each. So each team looked at one norm and the criteria and the assessment criteria below that, and made their own judgment. And then we put all of that together. So if you, next slide, please. And actually the next slide. So we put all of that together. If you can move on one more slide, please. We put all of that together and we got the office together for a half-day retreat as part of a larger retreat. And each of the teams that had provided the analysis of each of the norms presented that back. And then we asked, using SurveyMonkey, everyone to rate whether they agreed with the assessment made by that small team. And then we looked collectively at where there were areas of difference. So just as an example slide from our exercise, this was norm 11 on the enabling environment, which has got 4 different factors in it, which are all rated on a score of, as you know from the example now, level 1 to level 4, 4 being the best. And here's an example where, you know, of a group of 13, predominantly 10 agreed with the scoring that the small team had given and 3 partially agreed. And people were encouraged, obviously, to write in qualitative comments about whether they agreed, whether they didn't agree and why. And we used that opportunity to understand where there were different points of view and come to some concordance in the end about what the rating should be. So that process, we were quite a new team, few new members of staff joined the evaluation service. Actually a really good opportunity to get an understanding of what people feel, what they know, and where there are different perspectives on the norm. Back to you, Rachel. We could probably go back to the questions.
Yes, you went obviously through a very thorough brainstorming process, very good. But so, how useful did you find the self-assessment framework? And also, if you could tell us a little bit about the pros and cons of the maturity matrix. as it is now?
Sure. Well, I think it obviously proved to be useful. I mean, you know, first principles, obviously doing a self-assessment when you have a peer review coming in, a team that are going to look in a relatively short space of time. Remembering a peer review is not a full independent evaluation. It is a review of peers. It's quite time-bound and limited. So having the self-assessment as the basis upon which the peers make their judgments, obviously doing interviews and other sources of evidence that they use too, I think it's critical. You want to obviously put your point of view across, but you also want to uncover where the evidence is that supports your claims around which norms you adhere to and those you don't. So I think we found it useful. We're going back to it again now as we prepare our new policy to look at what were the views of staff, how have things changed over the interim period of about 9 months from when we did that exercise, and how might we use it going forward. So I think, you know, its strength in terms of measuring the norms, putting criteria on them, allowing for intra-organizational comparisons so we can do it over time, use the same questions, see how we've progressed or not. Obviously, it could be useful, you know, as part of the peer review process for interagency comparisons where those are appropriate. The bottom line is I think it's a very useful stock take of where we are or where one is as an organization, as an evaluation function against the various areas. It's very comprehensive. There are over 50 metrics. So I think it provides a good part of the armory that you have to assess where you are. In terms of weaknesses, similar to Katinka, I think it's a case where, you know, as a tool, some indicators, some metrics lend themselves to measurement and judgment more objectively than others. You know, there is guidance in the tool around what the evidence should be and how one should make that assessment. That's stronger in some areas than others. So some are more open to interpretation than others. So, you know, I think, and that's probably feeds over to one of the recommendations, you know, like any tool, it can be amended and revised over time based on experience to be a bit more specific in some areas.
So you touched about the recommendations. Do you have other recommendations for future peer reviews with respect to the content of the matrix and its use?
I think Katinka's covered this pretty well. I would just say, you know, inevitably an evaluation function is a reflection of the organization in which it's a part, and we are all different. We are within the UN system, we are amongst the DAC agencies and outside of that. And the norms obviously provide the framework that we've all subscribed to, but within that we recognize that some norms and some strengths of some norms are more important to certain organizations at different points in time. So I think what the strength of the self-assessment is that it can be applied and used effectively by each organization, calibrated according to what the expectations are of that function in that organization at that point in time. So I think it's a flexible tool. You know, obviously we would encourage people to use it inside and outside of peer reviews. There's nothing obviously constraining people from using it at any given point in time. And I think through that, you know, it will be reflected that it can be used in different ways. Different size organizations will provide different types of feedback on how it can be used. But I would just, you know, I would just encourage people to use it, and let's strengthen this as a tool going forwards. Over to you.
Thank you. Very interesting last point, David. Thank you very much, Katinka and David. Just to conclude very briefly, I think there are commonalities in what Katinka and David told us. Obviously, the maturity matrix is used at an early stage of the peer review, and in both cases, it seems to have been the opportunity to collectively reflect on you know, where the evaluation function stands vis-a-vis the norms and standards. So really to take stock at some point, and also to have a common understanding of the norms and standards. So the matrix is a useful point from what I hear from you and in this peer review process. It's also useful beyond your individual peer reviews. It's useful for comparison and benchmarking in UNEG. In terms of weaknesses, both of you underline perhaps the degree of subjectivity of the self-assessment, in particular for some of the metrics, we may need to refine the scoring system and provide opportunity to explore, to explain also the scoring. Not all indicators, as you indicated, Katinka, are fit small evaluation functions, but more generally, as David, I would like to say, to reiterate David's last point, there should be some possibility also to make adjustments using the matrix and tailor the tool more on where the organization wants to be, rather than having this high-level norms and standards scoring systematically. Katinka made a very strong recommendation for us, maybe that we need to consider as UNEG, which is using beyond the use of the matrix in individual peer review. It's looking at the matrix, the self-assessment matrix, as a tool, to assess all UNEG members against the norms and standards, and perhaps make it as a mandatory requirement to be a UNEG member. I think the yearly reporting on this may be a bit, maybe not really practical, but we could think of, doing so over a certain period of time. Then there were very useful practical recommendations on the digitalization of the tool, etc., etc. So thank you very much again, Katinka and David. Fortunately, both of you are part of the peer review working group. So, and I hope you will continue to do so this year. And so we will use your experience and that of others in refining the tool, and beyond, exploring how we want to use the tool as a socialization of our norms and standards beyond individual peer reviews. Perhaps, Andrew, I think it's time for the Q&A session. I hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Rachel, David, Katinka. I think we had really very useful both deep dive into the tool and then deep dive also into the experience of applying it. I hope colleagues are clear on what we'll be trying to do here. This is a key element of professionalizing UN evaluation functions, using the norms and standards, using the peer review tool. So we would love to hear your feedback now. And if you have any comments or questions, please use the chat box, or please be brave and turn your cameras on, and let's have a discussion. So I can see immediately Judith, over to you.
Yes, hi, and thanks, Andrew. Good to see you and Rachel and some other colleagues. So my name is Judith Jankovic, and I work for the International Criminal Court for their in their independent oversight mechanism. And well, first of all, thank you very much for this session. It's very useful and a lot of insights. Just a conceptual question in terms of the norms that have, I noticed they all have the different number of criteria, and maybe this is self-evident to others, but I was just wondering, is there any interpretation attached to that? Are some norms more important than others or more relevant? So that's one question. And I just wanted to also support the recommendation that Katinka made on best practices. I think that would be very useful, and also the column for justifications of scoring. I think that's also key, a key element that I would kind of expect there. And last but not least, I'm happy to say that I'll be participating as a member of this peer review working group. So I look forward to engaging with you in the future. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Judith. I don't see anybody else with their hands raised currently. I see Rachel with her thumbs up. So yes, agreed. That's great to hear your enthusiasm, and you'll be more than welcome. I can maybe have a go at answering the conceptual question, if others can hopefully prepare their comments or questions as we go forward. So I think, I think we should recognize a bit of a journey, right? That, this question of maturity of evaluation functions, this question of professionalization, of course, has been a long objective of UNEG. We certainly were building on existing rubrics that had been used, as I said, by OAOS and also GIU. Our goal in updating this tool, in addition to giving it sort of more prominence around the norms and standards, our idea was for the two to kind of reinforce each other. But it was also to try and simplify the assessment framework, bearing in mind that a big objective of professionalization work, a big objective actually of the peer review working group, is to make these kind of exercises and these tools more accessible to the full range of UNEG members. Remembering that, we have a whole range of course, all the different areas of work of the UN. We then have all different ranges in terms of the size of, you go from offices, 15, 20, 25 people in the offices, down to individual, units or offices. I give UNCDF's example. We only have 3 professional evaluators in our evaluation unit, which is commensurate with the size of the organization. So I think the goal was really to come up with a tool that would be able to accommodate the various needs of the different members, and to really operationalize these norms and standards into a set of performance dimensions. And I say we're around 50. And then I insist that I think really the innovation, and it does build, I think, on one of the previous ones, is that not only does this allow a snapshot of performance against dimensions, but it actually defines the attributes of increasing maturity as you go up. And again, this was very much intended with, supporting organizations go on their own journeys, which could include peer review, but wouldn't necessarily need to. So I hope that answered your question, Judith. So does anybody else have any comments or questions? If not, I can also suggest some. And I think basically I would have questions in the following areas. So in addition to thinking about how useful this can be for UNEG going forward, again, recognizing the objectives, recognizing the variety of users of the tools, does anybody have any reflections on that aspect? The second area would be, let's also expand our gaze beyond UNEG. Do we know examples of this sort of tool, this sort of approach within other evaluation communities? We may have some EvalNet members on the line, in the discussion. I'm not sure if that's something that EvalNet's working on, and if you would like to offer something there. And then the third area really is, well, do you agree with our broad direction of travel, that this, we will continue to use this as a part of peer reviews, but we want to continue socializing this so that everybody can use it? And if you have any ideas around what UNEG can do concretely going forward, then we'd very much welcome those ideas. So Peter, I see that your hand is up.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you for some very interesting presentations on this and sharing of experience. I'm not going to address as such the questions you just raised, Andrew, although I think those are very important questions. I'm also part of the peer review group, so they're very important questions, and input to that would really help us as we go forward. I just want to get back to a point you made, Andrew, about the path that self-assessment and the use of maturity instrument will take you to. And in the ILO, we are having independent evaluation of the evaluation function. We're not doing peer review, but we have actually used the self-assessment, the maturity tool, to sort of customize it to the kind of self-assessment and preparation for this independent evaluation that we needed to do. This involved sort of customizing it in a way that ensured that all the performance information related to the evaluation function would be made available in a way that would be easy for the team to approach it, the external evaluation team. But one of the challenges we had there is that the norms and standards are, of course, key to the assessment of the evaluation function, but we also, as many, we also have an evaluation policy. We also have an evaluation strategy that we also need to be assessed against. And of course, any evaluation policy and any evaluation strategy would be based on norms and standards and take those into consideration, but would also very much be positioned itself in the organizational context, as David was referring to. And we did actually have some challenges in trying to use the structure of the norms and standards and sort of relating that and linking that to our strategy. I think we managed to do it in an appropriate way. But I just wanted to raise that issue that any assessment of the evaluation function obviously has to consider the specifics of any evaluation policy and evaluation strategy, and that from our experience we foresee that as being quite challenging as such. I'm happy to share more on this with anyone who might be interested, but at this point I just wanted to raise that. Thank you.
Great, thank you very much, Peter. I think that's a really important point. I think, and please I invite my colleagues on the panel to come in. I think certainly within the framework of a peer review, and you're talking about an independent evaluation, but within the framework of a peer review, this tool is really, it's a self-assessment. And I think, as Rachel mentioned, it's intended to be the beginnings of an exchange. And of course, depending on the specificities of the function, the actual objectives and the focus of the peer review exercise would take into account elements of objectives around in the strategy, objectives in your specific policy. But I think it is a question perhaps for those exercises that are only focused on the tool. How do we how do we make sure that it's flexible enough to incorporate differences in, and this is David's point, differences in institutional setting, differences also in evaluation policies. So I'm not sure if my panel, any panel members want to come in in addition on your question and comment, Peter. David.
Thanks, Andrew and Peter, for the question. This is a debate that I think we've had for a while, and it's a very healthy one. I do think one additional point that is worth considering for those that want to consider applying the self-assessment framework is to think about what shape their function is within this institutional context and where they want it to go, because of course it's not a straight line towards some ultimate situation which is standardized and agreed upon in the same way that perhaps risk management or audit is. We know that some norms are more important in some organizations, some are less so. Capacity and utility may rank as higher than quality and credibility in others, depending on where you see yourselves and where your governing bodies and management see you. And so I think defining the shape of that ambition and vision up front can be helpful to position it prior to that self-assessment, so you can see where you want to go, and we don't just apply this equally. And I think that helps one see where the things like the policy and the strategy of the organization around evaluation fits or doesn't within that framework. Over.
Thank you very much, David, for those useful follow-up observations. I'm noting your comment, Simon, that you found some challenges there in I guess some of the specific dimensions that were presented. I mean, I would perhaps we didn't mention this before, but this is a working draft, so it is something that the peer review working group is seeking to update as we go forward. Again, there is this challenge of how do we represent the diversity of the evaluation functions that make up UNEG membership, while also providing a tool that can be as accessible to as many people as possible. And I think, you know, I've mentioned it before, but, you know, we were fortunate to be able to build on the work of JIU OAOS in this area before, but it's certainly an area that we can continue to perfect, I would say. But, you know, those are good comments. And if you want to provide additional inputs and comments, then of course, the group would very much welcome that. Sabas, would you like to put your, well, I see we're coming maybe to the end of the session. So in my experience, who's supposed to fill in the self-assessment matrix? It is the evaluation function to start with. Certainly in a broader peer review exercise, there would be lots of consultation with all sorts of stakeholders in the broader evaluation function, including senior managers. But to my understanding, and from experience, I think it's been filled in by the evaluand. This is the evaluand of the exercise evaluators being evaluated by others, and it is the evaluation function that does that. David, do you still have your hand up for this one? Okay. So, colleagues, I see that we're coming to the end of the session. Again, apologies for starting slightly late. I hope this has been a useful introduction to this tool, which, as I said, we think is certainly going to be, and it's already being very supportive of peer review working group activities. But we also see it as being something that everybody in UNEG can use at any time. You know, either doing it on their own or hiring consultants to kind of facilitate it. I think also there is an opportunity for UNEG as part of its influencing and partnership strategy externally to be more to make this work more public, and that's something again that the group can consider going forward. In terms of you can send comments to any of us on the panel and or our secretariat, which is unevaluationgroup@gmail.com. But please, all written comments and questions, etc., you know, would be very much welcome as part of our ongoing socialization of this work. So once again, let me thank my colleagues, David, Katinka, Rachel, for your inputs today for this work, and we hope this was an interesting session for everybody. And we, again, from a peer review working group perspective, we certainly appreciate your interest, and it's a voluntary group. So if colleagues are interested to join the group, then of course we'd very much welcome that. Leslie, thank you for your supportive comment. And I think at this point, I see the numbers falling away. I would suggest that we close the session.